The mafia boss's child would not stop screaming on the airplane until a quiet mother did something incredible. We will continue in a moment. Let us know where you are watching from. And if you find this story meaningful, please subscribe because I have a very special story for you tomorrow. Now back to our story. This story carries a powerful message. True strength is not about controlling others. It's about having the courage to choose love over power, vulnerability over control, and freedom over the cage of expectations. If you've ever felt trapped by your past, your family's expectations, or a life you didn't choose, this story is for you. The stale, recycled air of the cabin felt heavy against Mike Nelson's skin. At 30,000 feet, trapped between the lights of New York and the far-off glow of Los Angeles, he was a king inside a cage. On the ground, his name opened any door and ended any disagreement. He was a man who led armies with a single nod, whose money could change city skylines, and whose power flowed like a hidden river. But up here, in the small space of first class, he was no one. He was helpless. The reason for his total powerlessness was in his arms. His baby son, Jeffrey, was screaming. It was not a simple cry for food or a clean diaper. It was a raw, primal scream of complete misery. It was a sound that felt like it was being ripped from the baby's very being. The shriek cut through the steady hum of the engines, a sharp and constant siren that had been wailing for almost an hour. Each new scream was another attack on Mike's self-control. Mike's hands, which had managed secret deals and ended conflicts with perfect steadiness, were now trembling around the baby carrier he had set on the seat next to him. A thin layer of sweat formed on his forehead, feeling cool on his skin. He tried to rock the baby, but his actions were rigid and clumsy, more like a nervous habit than a comforting gesture. He whispered words he had heard mothers say at the playground, but his voice, used to giving orders, came out as a rough, unconvincing sound. He was failing, and the entire plane was watching. He could feel their stares, even when they tried to hide it. The businessman sitting across from him, who had given him a respectful nod when he recognized him, now stared firmly out the small window, his jaw tight with irritation. A woman 2 rows ahead, with her hair in a fancy bun, kept looking back over her seat, her face showing a mix of pity and frustration. Even the flight attendants, who were always so calm and professional, shared worried looks from their station. Their fixed, bright smiles could not hide the concern, or maybe the professional annoyance in their eyes. They simply saw a father having a hard time, which was a normal thing to see. But Mike felt the shame like a punch. He was Mike Nelson. He did not have hard times. He won. His frustration was a hot, twisting feeling in his stomach. In his own world, a problem like this, a source of such public annoyance, would be handled quickly and forever. An irritation would be taken care of, a disturbance would be silenced, but he could not order a baby to be quiet. He could not scare a baby into obeying. All the skills that had created his empire, all the fear and respect he had built over 20 years, were completely useless against the pure, desperate sadness of his own son. The baby's cries became louder and more frantic, and with every sharp scream, another piece of Mike's strong composure broke off, showing the raw, strange helplessness underneath. The constant sound was more than just noise. It was an accusation. It pulled him back into the dark parts of his past, to the very beginning of this unwanted fatherhood. The high-pitched cry was a key that opened a door in his mind he always kept locked. A door that went back to his own father, Elijah. Elijah Nelson had built Mike's life for him, one manipulative piece at a time. On the outside, his father was a leader with happy smiles and warm handshakes, a man who seemed to have a kind, grandfatherly presence. He created an image of a kind boss, both in his legal businesses and in the secret organization that was the real source of their family's strength. But behind his eyes, Mike had always seen the cold, constant ticking of a calculator. Elijah was always judging situations, always moving people around like pieces on a game board that only he could see. From a very young age, Mike was not treated like a son, but like an heir. His childhood was not about playing games, but about learning how to have power over people. He remembered one afternoon, when he was probably no more than 10, sitting in the heavy leather chair in his father's office, a room that always smelled of old paper and ambition. A man named Arthur, one of his father's oldest partners, stood in front of Elijah's desk, pleading about a business deal that had gone wrong. The man was sweating, his voice shaking. Mike had liked Arthur, who sometimes gave him small, carved wooden animals. Elijah had listened without interruption, his expression showing great sympathy. When Arthur was done, Elijah had smiled his warm, friendly smile. "Arthur, you have been with me for 20 years, he had said, his voice soft. "You are like family." Arthur had almost cried with relief. Elijah stood up, walked around the desk, and put a hand on the man's shoulder. "Which is why this is so hard. But a weak part of the chain, no matter how much we like it, puts the entire chain at risk. You understand?" The warmth in his voice was the same, but the message was delivered with the cold finality of a knife. Arthur had understood. He had left the room a completely broken man, and Mike never saw him or his carved animals again. After he left, Elijah had turned to Mike, his smile gone, replaced by the cool, judging look of a teacher. "Feelings are a weakness, Michael. Loyalty is a tool. When loyalty is no longer useful, the account must be closed. Do you understand?" Mike had nodded, the lesson settling like a cold rock in his young stomach. That was his childhood. He learned about power, not about love. He was taught lessons about betrayal, not told bedtime stories. Elijah's obsession was the family name, the continuation of their bloodline, the survival of the empire he had built from his own father's smaller, rougher business. This obsession turned into a deep fear as Mike grew into a young man who showed no interest in women or relationships. He was quiet, private, and emotionally distant. He was very good at the business tasks his father gave him, showing a sharp, brutal intelligence that made Elijah happy. But his personal life was empty. Elijah did not see a complicated young man dealing with the cold facts of his upbringing. He saw a threat to his life's work. His paranoia grew, creating two terrifying possibilities in his mind. Either his son was unable to have children, a biological failure, or he was, as Elijah would say with anger in private, interested in men. Either result meant the end of the Nelson dynasty. The idea ate away at him. He began to watch Mike with intense focus, his cheerful mask barely hiding his growing panic. He decided that if his son would not protect the family's future himself, he would force him to. The baby's scream became sharp again, pulling Mike from the memory of the office and throwing him into a more recent, more toxic one. The memory of that night was a haze of confusion and shame. His father had insisted on a celebration dinner, just the two of them, to celebrate finishing a very hard business deal. There was a toast. "To my son," Elijah had said, his eyes shining in the dim light of the fancy restaurant, making his father proud. It was a rare moment of what seemed like fatherly pride, and how rare it was should have been a warning. Mike remembered the drink, a fine, expensive liquor, tasting a little wrong, thick and heavy on his tongue. He had not thought much about it at the time. The world had become blurry after that, his thoughts turning to mud. His memory of what happened next was a confusing, sick feeling. He had a blurry, broken image of his father leading him from the restaurant, a strong hand on his arm. He remembered the smooth ride in an elevator, the quiet sounds of a hotel hallway, the click of a keycard. He remembered his father's voice, low and comforting, saying something about getting some rest. Then his father was gone. A woman had come into the room. She had a fake smile and empty eyes. Mike remembered feeling a deep sense of violation, of being a spectator in his own body, his arms and legs heavy and not responding. He was aware of her being there, of her touching him, but he was separate from it, watching from a great, foggy place. He woke up the next morning by himself in the strange hotel room, his head pounding with a chemical headache. A deep, soul-level certainty settled in him, cold and hard. Something had been taken from him. Months passed. The event was a poisoned memory he tried to forget, It was just another example of his father's suffocating control. He threw himself deeper into the business. The cold logic of numbers and power was a good distraction. Then a woman named Elena appeared at one of his private offices. He recognized her right away. She was the woman from the hotel. With a detached kind of calmness, she stood in front of his desk and told him she was pregnant. It was then that the full, terrible size of his father's plan became clear. The ugly truth of his father's plan settled in his gut. Elijah had not simply wished for a grandchild, he had built one from scratch. He had drugged his own son, arranged a conception, and fulfilled his twisted obsession. A chilling, empty sickness crept through Mike, quickly followed by a flash of helpless, burning anger. He had never been with a woman, never experienced a gentle touch or real connection. His existence was a cold world of business deals and violence. Now, a complete stranger carried his child, a baby born from the worst kind of betrayal. But he was cornered. Elijah had already sealed the deal. The entire scheme was in motion, and Mike, with all his influence in the world, was completely powerless to stop his father. Elena, for her part, had her own determination. In their last tense meeting, flanked by lawyers, she stated plainly she would not end the pregnancy. She was keeping the child for reasons Mike didn't care enough to figure out. Maybe the baby was her winning lottery ticket out of a tough life. Maybe she felt a spark of maternal instinct. It made no difference. After that, meeting, their paths never crossed again. The whole situation was managed by other people, just another transaction in a life filled with them. 9 months later, a cold, typed letter showed up. It said that Elena had died from complications while giving birth. The letter also declared with stark finality that he was now the only legal guardian of a healthy baby boy named Jeffrey. Now that same baby was screaming in his arms. Jeffrey was living, breathing proof of his father's manipulation and his own emotional emptiness. This child was the product of a cold, calculated duty, not love or even passion. Mike stared down at the red, wrinkled face, the mouth forming a perfect circle of agony, and he felt absolutely nothing. There was no love, no bond, only a huge, hollow space and the crushing weight of a duty he never agreed to. His life had taught him to view people as either useful or a liability, allies or threats. He had no idea how to see his own son as anything but a problem without a solution. Just as the tight knot of his rage and frustration became almost unbearable, just as a horrible, frightening urge to shake the baby to silence the noise surged through him, he saw something move. A woman was getting up from her seat across the aisle. She was plain, wearing simple, comfortable clothes that were practical, not stylish. Her hair was pulled away from her face in a neat ponytail. She had a certain stillness about her, a calm purpose in her stance that was the exact opposite of Mike's own tense energy. She never asked for his permission. She did not say a hesitant, "Can I help you?" She just met his frantic, wild-eyed stare for a brief moment. He saw no pity in her eyes, only a quiet and unnerving understanding. Then she started moving. She walked across the narrow aisle, her footing confident and sure even as the plane trembled slightly. She reached over him, her hands moving with a practiced confidence. Mike flinched out of pure habit. He was not accustomed to people entering his personal space without an invitation, not used to the touch of strangers. But her attention was completely on the wailing infant. Her hands were gentle but firm as they slipped under Jeffrey's back and head, lifting the baby out of Mike's stiff, awkward hold. The very second Jeffrey's body rested against her shoulder, the crying stopped. It didn't just quiet down. It didn't taper off. It was gone. The immediate total silence was more jarring than the screaming had been. It made Mike's ears ring. He just stared, stuck in his seat, as the woman started to rock Jeffrey. She moved with a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to come from a deep, natural place. She hummed a quiet, simple tune, her cheek resting gently on the baby's head. Jeffrey, who had been a rigid, screaming ball of pain, just melted against her. His tiny body became soft and relaxed. A little fist that had been clenched tight in anger uncurled and rested on her shoulder. Mike's brain, which was usually a fortress of planning and logic, was now a complete mess. How did she do that? Why? He had done everything he could think of. He had more money and power than most small countries, and yet this normal woman did, in 3 seconds, what he couldn't do in an hour. She hadn't used power or threats. She had used a language he couldn't understand, a strength he didn't have, tenderness. He watched this stranger comfort his son. He watched as Jeffrey's panicked breathing became slow and even, his eyelids fluttering shut in an expression of pure calm. The woman looked at him. Her eyes showed no judgment, only a peaceful understanding that unsettled him more than any threat ever could. In that single moment, he wasn't the powerful Mike Nelson. He was just a man who had been shown his own deep flaw, a coldness so complete he couldn't even soothe his own child. She had walked into his world, a world built on control and intimidation, and had taken away all his defenses with one simple act of kindness. For the first time in his adult life, a crack appeared in his armor. It was not caused by an attack, but by a gentle touch. As the airplane started its slow descent toward the glowing lights of Los Angeles, Mike Nelson sat in silence. He watched a stranger hold his sleeping son and began to wonder if his entire life had been founded on the wrong kind of power. They had a short, polite conversation after Jeffrey fell asleep in her arms. She had passed the sleeping baby back to Mike with that same smooth skill, and the child never woke. Mike felt a strange need to acknowledge what she had done and managed a clumsy, stiff thank you. His voice felt rough in his own ears. She only smiled, a small, real smile that made the corners of her eyes wrinkle. She said he just needed a different view, brushing off his gratitude. She told him her name was Mary. During the quiet, hushed talk that followed, a brief chat over the drone of the engines, she mentioned she owned a small coffee shop. She was flying back home after visiting her family on the East Coast. That detail, so normal and everyday, stuck in his thoughts. When the plane finally rolled to the gate and the seatbelt light turned off, the cabin buzzed with the ordinary sounds of people arriving. Passengers chatted, overhead compartments snapped open, and everyone started moving into the aisle. The noise seemed far away and muffled to Mike. He automatically grabbed his things, his mind still focused on what had happened. The quiet confidence in Mary's actions had soothed his shattered nerves. She hadn't looked down on him. She had just helped. And by doing that, she had given him a moment of quiet, something more valuable than any amount of money in his life. He found himself hoping, with a strange new feeling, that this sense of peace wasn't just a temporary fluke. There was something about her that he couldn't just forget. By the time he had walked through the terminal, passed through customs, and picked up his bags, the thought of Mary was a steady hum in the back of his mind. It wasn't only how she had handled Jeffrey, although that was a miracle that felt almost supernatural. It was the total lack of fear in how she approached him. She had walked right into his personal chaos, a space most people would naturally stay away from, and had brought instant peace. He was still trying to process it, a powerful man completely undone by a simple act of compassion. He looked at his phone. A private car was waiting to drive him to a sterile hotel room before his first meeting with his West Coast team. He had a couple of hours. He could use that time to pull himself together, to force his thoughts back into the cold, calculated patterns he needed. His fingers paused over the screen, ready to confirm his plans, but his thumb seemed to move on its own. He opened a browser and typed the name of the cafe she had mentioned. It was a small, simple place, located in a quiet neighborhood far from the shiny skyscrapers of the business district. It was the complete opposite of his entire world. The thought of walking into a place like that felt like a violation of his own rules, like entering a foreign land without any documents. It made no sense. It was a waste of time. It had no strategic benefit. And still, the urge to go there was overpowering. It was a pull toward the only thing that had felt real in a day of total confusion. Without letting himself think twice, Mike looked up the address, canceled his car with a short text message to his driver, and waved down a taxi, holding the infant carrier firmly in his other hand. When the taxi stopped at the curb, Mike could see the cafe was nothing like the sleek, powerful buildings he usually spent his time in. It wasn't fancy or modern. It was simple, with a painted wooden sign that said, "The Daily Grind." Large windows glowed with a warm and welcoming light. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods, of cinnamon and sugar, flowed out when he opened the door. It was a rich and comforting scent that was completely foreign to him. He looked around the room, and his heart gave a surprising little jump inside his chest. And there she was. Mary was working behind the counter. She was handing a cup to a customer and sharing a smile that was both soft and real. Her hair, which had been tied back on the plane, now hung in loose waves on her shoulders. She had on a simple dark apron over a plain t-shirt. Her whole presence gave off a sense of calm that seemed to fill the entire little shop. Mike paused in the doorway, a man with incredible power, suddenly feeling like a clumsy outsider. He was completely out of his element. The crushing pressure of his life, the nonstop threat of violence, the complicated maze of secrets, all of it seemed to melt away when he reached the door of this quiet place. As he stood on the threshold, a strange and new ache formed in his chest. The little bell over the door chimed as he let it swing shut. Mary glanced up, and her eyes found his from across the room. She showed no surprise, no hint of confusion. She just held his gaze for a second, and then her smile came back, even warmer this time, like she was welcoming an old friend. "Mike," she said. Her voice was as soft and even as it had been on the airplane. "I had a feeling I might see you again." A flash of shock went through him. He had come here on a wild, crazy impulse, but she acted like it was completely normal. His mind, always searching for hidden reasons and motives, tried to find a reason, but came up empty. "I never expected to find you," he admitted, his own voice sounding harsh and wrong in the peaceful cafe. He felt like an actor who had walked onto the wrong set, saying lines from a totally different script. Mary's smile grew even softer. "You are not the only one with surprises," she answered, her voice calm and unworried. "I did not really think you would come, but I am happy you are here." A short, quiet moment passed between them, filled with questions that neither of them asked. He moved one step forward, then another, until he stood at the counter. She motioned with her head, and they went to a small, private table in the corner. Jeffrey was still fast asleep in his carrier, which Mike set down carefully on the chair next to him. Mary never asked about his work, his money, or his life in New York. She did not try to find out who he was or what he did. She just sat there with him, and her company gave him a feeling of comfort he never knew he desperately needed. Over cups of coffee she made herself, they started talking. He was hesitant at first, but Mike started to share small, broken parts of his life. He talked about his son, and the immense, soul-crushing weight of raising a child alone, and the constant strain that was his whole world. He never said what his job was, but he talked about how cold and lonely it was. He was not a man who ever showed a crack in his armor, but there was something in the way Mary listened, with patient eyes that held no judgment, that made it feel safe to speak. For the first time in many years, Mike felt like someone was truly listening. In return, Mary shared stories about her own life. She talked about raising her daughter by herself after a painful past, and about the emotional wounds she still had, but would not let them control her. A quiet power flowed through her words, a deep strength that Mike started to admire. Even with all the pain she had endured, she held on to her ability to be kind, to offer compassion in a world that rarely gave any. That, Mike understood, was a truly special and valuable kind of strength. "I do not know why I came here," Mike admitted during a pause in their talk, and saying it out loud cost him more than he would show. "But I am happy I did. I am not used to feeling this way." Mary's gentle smile appeared again. "It is okay," she said. Her voice was soft. "We are all just trying to figure things out. I do not want anything from you, Mike. But if you ever just need someone to listen, I am here. As their conversation continued, the feeling inside him grew that this was not just a random meeting. Mary felt like an anchor in the storm that was his life. She had no clue about the darkness he operated in, the violence he could command, or the empire of fear he controlled. The strange thing was, her not knowing the truth was what protected him when he was with her. He was not a mafia boss. He was just a man, full of flaws and struggling. She was not scared of him, and that one simple truth was both deeply unnerving and incredibly freeing. They talked for a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mike felt a sense of peace, a lowering of the constant guard that was his usual self. But as the afternoon sun started to dim, the heavy reality of his other life began to push its way back in. The world of secrets, loyalty, and violence was waiting for him. It was the world that had created him, the world that he belonged to. Mary's voice cut through his dark thoughts. "I am glad you came today," she said. "Sometimes life puts us exactly where we are supposed to be." Mike looked at her, his thoughts a whirlwind of battling emotions. He could not ignore the intense connection between them, a force pulling him toward her that made no sense at all. She was different from any woman he had ever known. She saw him, not the legend or the power, but the man hiding underneath all of it. He nodded his head slowly, unable to find the right words. The decision he had to make was becoming more obvious, but it was not going to be simple. The world he had created took everything he had to give. And yet, sitting in this little cafe, Mike saw a tiny spark of something different, a possibility of being more than the person his father had made him. When it was finally time for him to go, he got to his feet, and the return to his own reality felt like a physical shock. Before he could leave, Mary looked up at him, her face showing nothing but pure, honest sincerity. "Look after yourself, Mike," she said gently, "and take care of your son. If you ever need to, you know how to find me." He gave one last sharp nod, but deep inside him, something had changed. It was a wish to be a better man, to be more than he had become. As he walked out of the warm cafe into the cool night air, the size of the choice he had to make felt bigger than ever before. For the very first time, though, Mike felt like he might actually have a choice. The days after he first went to the cafe were filled with conflict. Mike moved through the fancy settings of his Los Angeles business, his expression as cold and controlled as always, but his mind was a mess. He led a meeting in a conference room with glass walls that looked out over the massive city, and his top men gave him reports about shipping plans and fights over territory. But his thoughts kept returning to the smell of fresh coffee and the quiet power in Mary's eyes. The life of money and violence, which had been his only reality, now felt distant and unreal, like a blurry picture. The only thing that felt truly real was the image of a sleeping baby and a woman's simple, fearless smile. He felt the pull of his responsibilities more intensely than he had in a long time. Now that duty felt like a heavy chain pulling him back to a world he was starting to doubt. With every hour that went by, the calm he had discovered in Mary's cafe felt more and more like a far-off fantasy, a short, impossible refuge in the wasteland of his life. Her kindness had sliced through the layers of protection he had built over a lifetime, and now he felt the cold air. He had not realized he needed that kind of warmth, but now that he had felt it, not having it was a real pain that settled deep inside him. The hotel suite he was staying in was a huge, cold room made to impress important visitors and wealthy gamblers. It had every possible luxury, from a bar full of drinks to a wide view of the city lights, but it was not made for a baby. The sharp edges of the fancy furniture, the unstable statues on low tables, the dozens of electrical sockets at the perfect height for a crawling infant, all of it created a whole new kind of problem that all his money and power could not solve. He had sent two of his most reliable men, a couple of huge men known only as Leo and S, on a mission. These were men who could defend a building from a major attack. They had once, with incredible skill, convinced a difficult witness to move to a country that would not send him back. Their abilities were famous in some crowds. Their job right now, however, was turning out to be their biggest challenge yet, making the hotel suite safe for a baby. They were standing in the center of the large living room, with shopping bags all around them from a store with a smiling cartoon giraffe as its symbol, and they looked totally and hopelessly confused. S, a man as big as a mountain with a scarred face and hands as large as plates, was holding a little plastic bag of socket covers like it was a live bomb with the pin already pulled. "Boss?" Sal asked, his low voice thick with real confusion. "You want us to put these things in the sockets? All of them? What for? Do you think somebody is going to hide a microphone in one? Because if you do, I know a guy who can check the whole place for bugs, much better than these plastic things. That outlet could kill him." The thought was sharp and cold. Mike was a man who commanded enormous power, yet he felt helpless against a small hole in the wall. He held his son, Jeffrey, who was making soft, happy noises in his arm. This small life was completely unaware of the danger. Power exists to protect, Mike thought, and he had to learn how. He pointed to the plastic covers he had bought. "They are for him," he told Sal, "so he does not put his fingers in there." Sal stared from the baby to the outlet, his mind struggling with a problem he could not shoot. Across the room, Leo studied the glass coffee table, identifying its sharp corners as an immediate threat. "I could file this edge down," Leo offered, his voice low and serious. "I have a diamond file in the car. It would take about 1 hour. Or we could remove the table. Tactically, it is a liability. It provides poor cover during a firefight, and the glass would create a messy situation." The absurdity of it made Mike feel a deep, lonely exhaustion. He was surrounded by killers, and he was completely alone with this baby. "You will not shoot the table, Leo," Mike said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "And we are not planning a firefight in this hotel suite." For a moment, his fear was replaced by a strange sense of safety. These dangerous men were showing an unexpected, clumsy compassion. "You can buy soft corners," Mike explained. "Pads you stick on the edges." "Pads?" Leo asked, his expression blank. "Like for soundproofing?" "No," Mike said. "For babies. So when they run headfirst into the table, and they will, they do not crack their skulls open." Leo absorbed this with the seriousness of a mission briefing. He nodded. "Protective gear for the asset. That makes sense. We will get the pads." Meanwhile, Sal had moved to inspect the cord of a floor lamp. He held it up, tracing it back to the wall. "What about this, boss?" he asked. "This is a strangulation hazard, an electrical hazard, and a tripping hazard. This lamp is a triple threat." Mike looked at the lamp and saw the complete failure of their world. The system of violence they lived in was useless here. He saw every victim their business had ever created, all the lives that were not protected. The entire system was broken. "Just tie the cord up," he said, feeling defeated. "Secure it somehow. Use your initiative." He sent them to the store with a detailed list. He did not trust them to understand spoken directions. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. "Boss, it is Leo," he whispered, as if conducting surveillance. "We are in the baby aisle. There are a lot of pastel colors here. Pink and yellow mostly. These colors offer very little tactical advantage. They provide no camouflage." Mike closed his eyes and leaned his head against the suite's cool window. "The color does not matter, Leo. Just get the items on the list." "Right. Right. Okay. What about this formula? They have gentle, neuropro, sensitive, and something called soy-based. Which one should we acquire? Is one of them fortified, like with vitamins? Is there a tactical advantage to one over the others? Get the one in the yellow can, Leo. The one that says infant on it." There was a short pause. "Sal is asking about the diapers," Leo said. "They have sizes, like shoes. What size is the asset? I mean, the baby." Mike looked at Jeffrey, who was now chewing on his fist. "How would I know that, Leo?" "Just guess. He is small. Get the small ones." Small. Got it. There was another pause. There is newborn. Size 1, size 2, all the way up to size 6. Newborn sounds pretty small. Is he a newborn? He seems like he has been born for some time. He is a few months old. Just get size 1 and size 2. We will figure it out. Roger that. Acquiring size 1 and size 2. Also, Sal discovered something called a diaper genie. He is asking if it is a container or if it actually grants wishes. Mike hung up the phone. He looked at his son. His son looked back, drool on his chin, completely untroubled by the logistical mayhem he was creating. Mike felt his mouth curve into a smile. This was his new reality. He had one foot in a world of violent order and the other in a world of confusing pastel chaos. It was exhausting. It was ridiculous. But it felt more real than anything he had known in years. The call from his father came late that night. Mike had just succeeded in getting Jeffrey to sleep after an hour of struggle. He learned that the formula had to be at the perfect temperature, a lesson taught by a face full of spit-up. The swaddle, a skill Mary had shown him, required 7 attempts to master. When the baby's eyes finally closed and his breathing grew steady, Mike felt a sense of achievement greater than any business deal. The silence in the hotel suite was a rare and precious thing. The phone's sharp ring destroyed it. He rushed to answer it before it woke the baby, his heart pounding with irritation. He knew who was calling before he even looked. "You have been quiet," Elijah said. His voice was smooth and pleasant, the tone he used when he sensed a weakness. There were no greetings. There never were. "I have been busy, Father," Mike answered. His voice was neutral as he walked to the far side of the suite, away from the sleeping child. "Busy is good. Busy is profitable," Elijah said. "The D'Angelo situation out west demands your attention. He has grown bold. He believes our focus is elsewhere. Given your new responsibilities, you must remind him of the price for such boldness." The D'Angelo family was a constant problem, a smaller crew that tested the Nelson borders from time to time. It was a simple job, normally given to a local lieutenant to handle with a firm, violent message. That his father was giving it to him directly, and mentioning Jeffrey, was a clear challenge. He was asking Mike if he still had the courage for this work. "I will handle it," Mike said, his voice flat. "I know you will," Elijah replied, with an edge of steel in his voice. "I also hear you have been taking detours. A little coffee shop in a peaceful neighborhood. A curious choice for a man with your refined tastes." The casual way his father revealed this information was a clear warning. "I am always watching. You have no secrets from me." Mike felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He was used to his father controlling his business. But invading this small, fragile new part of his life with Mary was something else entirely. "I had a coffee," Mike said, his voice devoid of emotion. Elijah laughed, a dry, grating sound that scraped against Mike's ear. "Of course you did. Just remember what is important, Michael. A single moment of distraction can undo a lifetime of work. Work, our family's legacy. Do not allow some woman with a sad story and a cute little shop to make you soft. You are a Nelson. Never forget what that name means." The call was over, but the threat remained in the room like a bad smell. Mike stood in the dark suite, the city lights painting long shadows on the floor. He felt the old, familiar cage closing around him again. Elijah would never accept someone like Mary. She did not fit his world. She was too gentle, too honest, too good. Her worth could not be calculated in money or power, so to Elijah, she was worthless. The anger and defiance that swelled inside Mike was a hot tide, pushing back against the cold grasp of his father's control. The intrusion did not push him from Mary. It drove him toward her. He found a break in his schedule the next afternoon, a 4-hour window between a meeting on logistics and a dinner to secure a new distribution line. He told himself it was a foolish and significant risk. But the memory of the peace he found in her cafe was a strong pull. He hired a trusted nanny, a woman vetted more carefully than most government agents, to watch Jeffrey. Then he went back. This time, the bell above the door sounded like a welcome. Mary was at a small table by the window doing paperwork, with a pair of reading glasses on her nose. It was a simple, normal scene, and he found it deeply charming. She looked up, and her smile was instant and open. It struck him with a force that stole his breath for a moment. "You came back," she said, as if it was the most natural thing possible. "I said I might," he answered, feeling the tension leave his shoulders for the first time in days. Mike approached her table, and she pointed to the empty chair. He sat with her for more than an hour. Their talk began with small things, like the day's weather or the book she was enjoying. She described the odd habits of her usual patrons. Mary told a story about Mr. Abernathy, an older gentleman who came in at 7 o'clock sharp every morning. He would buy a single black coffee and complete the crossword puzzle in pen. Mary shook her head in admiration and said he never used a pencil. The man was so confident, he simply committed to his answers. If he made an error, he drew a line through it and continued. She found that inspiring. A laugh escaped Mike, a sound that felt like a surprise. He could not think of the last time something so simple had made him laugh. In his world, commitment was a final, serious choice. To hear of a man with that same intensity for a game was strangely freeing. He brought Jeffrey with him 2 days later. The infant was not sleeping this time. He was fussy and wide-eyed, his tiny face wrinkled with annoyance at everything. Mike felt the familiar sense of powerlessness return. Mary, however, just smiled and held her hands out for the child. She asked if she could hold him. He handed Jeffrey to her with profound gratitude. In her arms, the baby's crying stopped almost instantly. She made soft, playful sounds to him that Mike would never have imagined making. Jeffrey's eyes, wide with curiosity, focused on her face. The peaceful interlude did not last long. A powerful and unpleasant smell began to rise from the infant. Mike knew it right away. It was a scent that had become his nemesis. Mary wrinkled her nose slightly and then chuckled. She said she thought someone needed to be changed, returning the baby to him. The bathroom in the back had a changing station. Mike took his son and walked toward the back with the grim focus of a soldier entering a fight. The restroom was tiny but very clean. He unfolded the changing mat, placed Jeffrey on it, and started the task. He had been through this a dozen times, but it was never any easier. of any weakness. "And is that the man you are?" Mary asked, her voice gentle. "The man he built?" He looked into her eyes and saw real compassion, a kindness that demanded nothing from him. For the first time ever, he faced the question with total, brutal honesty. "I do not know," he admitted. The confession was a huge act of vulnerability, leaving him feeling raw and strangely lighter. "Until I met you, I never even thought to ask. I just existed. I was what he told me to be. But now I think I am not that man. Or at least I do not want to be." When dinner was over, they walked outside. Into the crisp night air, he led her toward her car. The street was peaceful, the sound of the city a distant hum. He stopped under the soft light of a street lamp. He paused. Everything he had ever learned, every trained instinct, screamed at him to keep his distance, to keep the barrier between his two lives solid and unbreakable. The danger was enormous. His father was always watching. But the pull he felt toward her, toward this sense of normalcy and real connection, was more powerful than any fear. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion or ownership like the few hollow experiences from his past. It was soft, like a question, a gentle step into a new world. It was a moment of complete, undefended honesty, a silent question and a silent answer happening at the same time. When he moved back, he saw surprise in her expression, which was quickly replaced by a deep, genuine warmth in her eyes. It was a look that made him feel seen, truly seen for the first time in his entire life. The hope that rushed through him was so strong it was almost disorienting. He went back to his hotel suite that night feeling lighter than he had in decades, as if the world was suddenly brighter and full of new possibilities. He looked in on Jeffrey, who was sound asleep, and he stood beside the crib for a long time, simply watching his son breathe. For the first time, when he looked at the baby, he did not just see a duty or a problem. He saw a future. That perfect moment was destroyed the next day. A polished black car, from his own company fleet, had been following him for days. He knew it was there, of course, he always knew. But he had decided to ignore it. Now he understood the horrifying reason for that surveillance. A package arrived for him at the hotel, delivered by a messenger with a blank, unreadable face. There was no sender's address, no message, just a simple manila envelope that felt thick. With the steady hands of a surgeon, he broke the seal. Inside, there was one high-quality photograph. It showed him and Mary under the streetlight, captured in that quiet, private moment. The image was perfectly sharp. The expressions on both of their faces were recorded in brutal detail. His eyes were closed, her hand rested on his chest. The picture was taken from far away, with a powerful zoom lens, likely from a rooftop across the street. The message was just as direct as the one Elijah had given him over the phone, but this was infinitely more terrifying. "I see everything. There is no place you can run. She is in my world now, whether you accept it or not." The cold rage that surged through him was absolute, a blinding heat that burned away everything else. This was a violation on a scale he had never known. It was the defilement of the only pure thing in his world. He swiped a heavy glass lamp off a side table, and it shattered against the wall in a spray of glittering pieces. The noise was loud and violent, but it did nothing to put out the fire raging inside him. His first urge was to call his father, to finally let loose a lifetime of suppressed fury, to scream all the words he had held inside for decades. But he knew it would be useless. Elijah would just pretend he knew nothing, or worse, defend his actions as a necessary step to protect the family. He was an expert at turning your own anger against you, at making Mike feel like his rage was just a childish outburst. His second urge was to run from Mary, to sever all connection and vanish from her life in order to keep her safe. It was the logical, strategic choice. If she was a weakness, then the answer was to eliminate that weakness. It was the type of cold-blooded thinking he had been taught his entire life. It was precisely what his father would want him to do. But the idea of never seeing her again, of going back to his cold, meaningless existence, was now something he could not bear. He had experienced something real, and he could not just forget how it felt. He went to the cafe that afternoon, the photograph burning a hole in his pocket. He had to see her, to look at her, and decide if this was a risk he was willing to let her take. He saw her arranging fresh pastries in the glass case, humming quietly as she worked. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, but the smile vanished when she registered the expression on his face. "Mike, is something wrong?" she asked, her brow creasing with worry as she walked around the counter to meet him. He could not find the words to tell her about the picture, about his father's suffocating watch over his life. How could he possibly explain that world to her? How could he make her understand that just by having dinner and sharing a kiss with him, she was now a target, a piece in a game she never knew she was playing? The words would sound crazy. They would contaminate the simple good thing that had just started between them. "I have to return to New York for a bit," he said, and the lie tasted like ash. "Something important came up with the company. It cannot wait." A flicker of disappointment crossed her eyes, like a shadow covering their light, but she hid it almost immediately. She was a strong woman. He knew that already. "Oh, okay. For how long?" "I do not know for sure," he answered, his voice tight. He desperately wanted to reach out and touch her, but he felt like his hands were stained by the world he came from. "Mary, this is complicated, more complicated than you can imagine." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering, as if she could see the secrets he kept locked away. "I understand," she said, her voice a soft reassurance. The truth was, she could never grasp the whole terrible story. "You do not owe me an explanation. Just be safe, for you and for him." When he walked out of the cafe, he felt like a fraud and a weakling. He was not running to find an answer. He was running from the only woman who made him believe he could be a good man. The war inside him was ripping him to pieces. On one side stood his inheritance, his obligation, the cruel world that forged him. On the other stood a gentle woman, a sleeping boy, and the fragile hope of a life he never thought he could earn. He knew a decision was coming. He could not exist in both realities. The photograph proved his father would make sure of that. He could either cut all ties to Mary and recommit to the empire, becoming the ruthless leader his father required, or he could somehow break away from the empire itself. That second path felt like an impossible dream. Nobody just quit the Nelson family. There was no retirement package. The only way you ever left was in a casket. But as he sat in his hotel room that night, he stared at the broken glass from the lamp scattered across the floor. He picked up the photograph one more time. He saw the genuine hope in Mary's expression, a look he knew he was responsible for. Then he looked at his own face in the picture and did not recognize the man staring back, a man at complete peace. He understood that going back to his old life, a life that lacked that feeling, was just another kind of death. He was no longer fighting just his father. He was fighting the person he had been for years, and for the first time, he did not know who should win. He flew to New York the following morning with the lie he told Mary sitting like a stone in his stomach. The return flight was the exact opposite of his trip there. Jeffrey was sound asleep in his carrier, a small, calm miracle who knew nothing of the war inside his father's mind. Mike no longer felt like a man who was failing at being a dad. This time he felt like a man being ripped in two different directions by forces he was just starting to see. The cold, calculated world of his father had always been his home, full of harsh truths and a clear chain of command. But the warmth inside Mary's little cafe, the solid weight of his son in his arms, the pure honesty of a kiss beneath a streetlight had created a powerful new center of gravity in his universe. He was trapped between two opposing forces, and he knew he had to pick one or be torn to pieces. When he returned to New York, the massive gears of his family's empire immediately pulled him back in. The city itself seemed to work against his new sense of hope. The tall buildings threw long, cold shadows that felt like his father's influence reaching out. His days were filled with meetings, tense discussions held in wood-paneled offices, and the private rooms of fancy restaurants where the food had no taste. He was once again surrounded by his lieutenants, tough men loyal to him through a mix of fear, money, and a certain kind of respect. They gave him updates on their business, on moves made by rivals, and on the never-ending power games of the criminal world. Mike handled it all with his usual sharp focus, his mind working like a precision instrument. He made the calls that protected their turf and grew their earnings. He was acting the part of the heir to the throne, the cool and effective leader. But now, for the very first time, the role felt like a costume that was too tight and hard to breathe in. He saw his father often, called to the huge, luxurious mansion the family used as its unofficial command center. Elijah watched him during these meetings with the unnerving stillness of a predator. His eyes saw everything. He never brought up Mary or the photo again. He did not have to. The message had been delivered with perfect clarity. The constant watching was a leash, and his father was just testing its length, letting him think he was free before the inevitable pull. Elijah was sure of himself, certain that his son, when faced with the risks of an outside relationship, would run back to the familiar power and safety of his old life. He was convinced he had already won, but something deep inside Mike had changed. It was like the ground had shifted beneath his feet, and it could not be moved back. The peace he found with Mary was not just a strange, brief moment or a crack in his upbringing. It had become the new normal, the standard by which he judged everything else in his life. The authority he had in New York, which once made him feel proud and safe, now felt empty, like a show he was putting on for people he no longer wanted to impress. The respect he got from his men now felt like a prison built from their own fear. He would see his reflection in the dark windows of a skyscraper and see a stranger wearing an expensive suit, his face a mask of control. He would remember the unguarded man in the photograph his father sent, the softness in his own features, and the difference between the two was a sharp pain. He started doing things he had never done. He would get up in the middle of the night just to check on Jeffrey, not because he had to, but because a strange new affection was growing inside him. He would stand over the crib in the faint light and just watch his son sleep, amazed by the tiny hands and the peaceful expression. He began to awkwardly try to play with the baby, holding up toys and making silly faces. The very first time Jeffrey let out a pure, happy laugh, Mike felt something break open inside his chest. A warmth spread through all the cold, empty parts of his heart. The real change happened during a meeting about a longtime rival named Lorenzo. Lorenzo was a survivor from the old days, a smart player who had lasted for decades by knowing when to attack and when to back down. Lately, he had been attacking. One of his crews had moved in on a key Nelson supply line, a direct challenge that cost them money and could not be ignored. The men gathered around the long conference table were in agreement. Their decision was simple and violent. A clear message needed to be sent. Lorenzo had to be removed and his business taken over. It was the standard play, something straight out of their rulebook. It was the same order Mike himself would have given just a few weeks prior without even thinking. His second in command, a sharp and power-hungry man named Dominic, eagerly detailed the plan. He was a thin, ambitious man with cold eyes and a fast mind, always looking for a chance to prove himself. He pointed to a spot on a satellite image shown on the wall. Dominic's voice was calm and professional as he said they could get Lorenzo alone at his daughter's wedding the following month. He explained that it would be public and messy. It would show everyone that nobody was safe, not even during their happiest moments. The fear that would spread, he said, would be more valuable than a dozen secret hits. Mike stared at the map, then at a picture of Lorenzo's daughter from another file. She was a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, her face shining with the pure joy of a bride. He thought about Mary talking about her own daughter, about the mix of pride and worry in her voice when she talked about sending her off into the world. He thought about Jeffrey asleep in the other room, his entire life still a blank slate. The cold, hard math of his world, The emotionless logic of gains and losses suddenly seemed twisted and evil. "No," Mike said. His voice was quiet, but it had a power that made the entire room go silent. Dominic looked up, his expression showing his confusion. "Boss, it is the best chance we will get. It will have the biggest impact with the smallest risk to our guys." "We will not go near him at his daughter's wedding," Mike declared, his eyes moving across the faces of his men. He looked at each of them until they looked down. "We will not go near his family. At all. Find a different way, a way that only targets him. Crush him financially, turn his own people against him, destroy his businesses. I do not care how much time it takes, but his family is not to be touched." A low sound of surprise and discomfort moved through the room. This was not how they usually did things. It was a break from the brutal rules Elijah had established. It seemed less effective, less final. It could even be seen as a sign of weakness. Mike looked at every man in the eye, his face like stone, challenging any of them to argue with him. None of them did, but he noticed the glances they shared when they thought he was not looking. He saw that a seed of doubt had been planted. When he told his father about the decision later that day, Elijah's response was exactly what he had anticipated. They were in Elijah's huge, grand library, a room built to show off power and tradition. The walls were covered with old books Elijah had never opened and art from places he did not care about. It was all a performance, a set piece, just like everything else in their lives. "You are letting your feelings get in the way of good judgment, Michael," Elijah said. His voice was dangerously quiet. He never had to raise it. "The message is everything. The fear is our greatest asset. You picked a weaker option because you are thinking about some woman and a baby in Los Angeles. You are compromised." "I made a strategic choice," Mike replied, his voice firm, refusing to be intimidated. "A public hit at a wedding brings chaos, police, and news reporters. Ruining a man quietly behind the scenes is cleaner and has a longer-lasting effect. It demonstrates a different, more advanced kind of power." Elijah smiled. It was a thin, predatory smile that had no real warmth. "Do not insult me by pretending this is about strategy. This is about her. You are becoming weak, and our enemies will sense it like sharks smelling blood in the water. I have spent my whole life building this family, and I will not let you destroy it because you suddenly grew a conscience." The argument grew more intense from that point. It was a clash of wills, the explosive result of years of hidden anger and suffocating control. For the first time ever, Mike did not surrender. He did not retreat into quiet obedience. He fought back, defending his position, arguing that his decision was not a moment of weakness, but a new path forward. "Your way is the old way, father," Mike said. The words tasted like treason but felt like freedom as he spoke them. "This is a war that never stops. Every person we hurt has a family, and that family learns to hate us. There are better ways to be powerful." "There is only one way," Elijah hissed. The friendly mask he wore finally fell away, showing the angry tyrant underneath. His face was a contorted sneer of disgust. "The way that keeps us alive, the way I showed you. And you are risking it all. You are risking everything we built, everything I gave you." Mike walked out of the library that night knowing his father was right about one thing. He was a liability, not because he was weak, but because what he wanted from life had changed. It was not about the family business anymore, or the dark history of the Nelson name. It was about Jeffrey. It was about Mary. It was about a future where he did not have to be his father to feel strong. He spent the next 2 weeks setting his plan into motion. It was the most intricate and perilous plan he had ever created, and he put it into action with the same detached precision his father had taught him. He was aware of the irony. This was not about claiming new ground or taking out a competitor. This was about getting out. He was using every lesson his father had given him, all the brutal efficiency and tactical thinking, but he was turning it against the very world he was meant to rule. He was breaking out of his own prison from the inside. He started by secretly shifting his personal money to untraceable foreign accounts. He built new identities, protected by layers of fake companies that would be almost impossible to connect to him. He established a completely legal business, a shipping company, using people his father's network could never trace. He stayed late every night, long after everyone else left, erasing his digital footprint with the care of a man planning a robbery. The hardest step was ensuring the safety of Mary and Jeffrey. He knew he could not just vanish. His father would consider it the greatest betrayal, an insult he could never forgive. Elijah's anger would have no limits. He would chase them across the globe. He would not do it from love, but from the need to prove that nobody could escape his influence. So Mike created one last, desperate plan. He knew his father's biggest vulnerability was his obsession with his legacy. The family business had to remain powerful and whole. Mike was also aware that Dominic, his ambitious second-in-command, had been making moves on his own. He was quietly gathering support and creating his own network of allies. Dominic was probably getting ready for the day Mike might fail, so he could take his place. The man Mike used to be would have seen this as a danger to be removed. The new Mike saw a chance. He set up a secret meeting with Dominic at a small, unknown diner in a part of town where no one knew them. The place was so ordinary and public that it offered them both a degree of safety. "You want my job?" Mike asked, not wasting any time as Dominic sat down in the booth. "You believe I am losing my edge? You think you could handle it better?" Dominic was cautious, his gaze sharp and his posture rigid. He was obviously trying to figure out if he was walking into a trap. "I am loyal to the family, boss. I always have been." "Loyalty is something you buy," Mike said, repeating words his father had said years ago. They tasted awful in his mouth. "And you are ready for a bigger role." "I get it. Wanting more is not a sin. I am going to give you exactly what you want. The family, this whole thing, is yours. But there is one condition." Dominic's shock was real, shattering his guarded look. He had come expecting a fight, not a promotion. "What is the condition?" "You will make my father think this was his decision," Mike said, leaning closer. "You will go to him. You will give him proof that I am weak, that I am distracted. You will use the financial statements from the legitimate company I am building to show him where my loyalty really is. You will persuade him that I am a lost cause, a weakness that has to be removed for the good of the family. You will propose that the only path to save the business is to put a stronger, more committed leader in charge. You. You will let him believe he is choosing you to protect his life's work from his own failed son." Mike let the idea settle. It was a perfect piece of psychological warfare, playing on Dominic's ambition and Elijah's pride. It allowed his father to feel like he was winning, casting out his flawed son while securing the business with a hand-picked superior replacement. "And what do I get in return?" Dominic asked, his mind obviously spinning as he weighed the risks against the prize. "In return," Mike said, his voice hard and final, "you will make me disappear. My son and the woman I am with, Mary, are never to be touched. Any move made by my father or anyone else against them will be considered a personal attack on your new leadership. You will make this clear using the full power of the family. That is the price for the throne. You take the power. I get to be left alone. If that is ever disturbed, I will reduce your new empire to ash. You know I have the ability." Dominic knew. He had witnessed Mike's capabilities up close. He understood what the man could do when cornered. He gave a slow nod, a new kind of calculated admiration in his eyes. The agreement was sealed over lukewarm coffee in a faceless diner. The final meeting with his father felt strangely empty. Dominic had done his job flawlessly, making his argument with the perfect blend of hesitation and drive. Elijah called Mike to the library for the last time. The old man was at his huge desk with a file open before him. He did not seem mad. He seemed weary and deeply let down, which Mike knew was a much stronger weapon for him. "Dominic has shown me some things," Elijah started, gesturing toward the folder. "Your new projects, your legal investments, your sad and continuing fixation on that woman and her little cafe. I had hoped you would come to your senses. I realize now how wrong I was. You lack the resolve for what this job demands. You are not the son I raised. Mike stood in front of the desk without a word, allowing his father to have the last scene in their long, sad story. You are making a terrible choice, Mike, Elijah said, his tone filled with a cold sense of finality. Do you really think you can leave all of this behind? Leave me? Leave the family? You have no idea what you are doing. Mike did not even blink. I have spent my entire life doing what you demanded, Father. That is over now. I am finished with it all. Elijah got to his feet, his face cold and assessing. You are weak, Mike. You always were. It must be your mother's blood. I always thought so. You believe you can escape this life, this heritage? You can't. It is a part of you. You will come begging to come back when that woman is gone. When the outside world chews you up and spits you out, you will come crawling back, and I will not be here to let you in. Mike simply shook his head. His father's words had no power over him anymore. They were just empty sounds from a life he was leaving. I am not coming back. I have made my decision, and I will not regret it. For a long moment, only a heavy, suffocating quiet filled the space between them. The strain in the room felt like a physical presence. Then Elijah's voice cut through the silence, colder than ice. You are not my son any longer, he said, his eyes narrowing with pure contempt. You are nothing to me. A disappointment. A failure. I do not have a son. Mike's heart did not break. He had been hearing versions of those words his whole life. They had been used as a weapon, a leash to control him. This time, they did not hurt him. They were just the last powerless insults from a man who had already lost. He was free. Goodbye, Father, Mike said. He turned and walked out the door, out of the library, and away from the life that had been planned for him. He never once looked back. He took a flight to Los Angeles that very day, with Jeffrey held tight in his arms. The city appeared different as the aircraft made its descent. It was no longer a map of business interests and power struggles. It looked like a new start. He did not check into a hotel. He drove directly to Mary's cafe. He saw her on a bench out front, her face angled toward the setting sun, which bathed the quiet street in a warm, golden light. She looked serene, deep in her own thoughts. She glanced up as he got closer, her eyes growing wide with surprise, before they softened when she noticed the change in his face. He was not the man who had left her behind with a poor excuse and a worried expression. He seemed lighter. He seemed free. Mike, she whispered, getting to her feet as he came to a stop in front of her. What is happening? He took both of her hands in his. His heart was hammering, not from dread, but from a frightening new sense of hope. I left it all, he said, his voice strong and certain. The business, my father, all of it. I am never going back. I came here for you, for Jeffrey, and for us. Tears filled Mary's eyes, sparkling brightly in the evening light. She studied his face, searching for a hidden trick or a lie. She saw none. She pulled him into a hug, her arms circling him as if she planned to hold on forever. Are you serious? She murmured against his shoulder. I am, he replied, his voice full of a feeling he no longer tried to suppress. I chose this life with you, with our boy, if you will still have me. She leaned back just enough to cup his face in her hands, her gaze locking with his. I will always have you, Mike. Every part of you. For the very first time, he felt he was in the right place in the universe. He had turned his back on the shadows and was prepared to walk toward the brightness. He did not know what was coming next, but he was no longer terrified of the future. The months that came after were a time of slow reconstruction. It was not a perfect story. The shift was not seamless. Remnants of his former life still haunted him. There were flashes of paranoia that made him check the locks a second time, or search a crowd for faces he knew. Sometimes he would wake up in the dark, his heart hammering from a bad dream. The old survival skills were difficult to unlearn, but with every day that went by, the hold of his past weakened just a little more. He dedicated his focus and his vast resources to his new, legitimate enterprise. The logistics company presented a true test, a landscape of contracts, rules, and client relations that was completely different from the harsh simplicity of his old world. But it was a clean test. Each victory was his alone, free from the stain of violence or terror. He discovered a surprising sense of fulfillment in constructing something from the ground up instead of just taking it. He, Mary, and Jeffrey settled into an ordinary house with a small yard. It was a humble home with a squeaky porch and a large tree out front. It felt like another planet compared to the cold, luxurious environments he knew as a child. This home was full of warmth, the smell of Mary's baking, and before long, the sound of Jeffrey's first words. To Mike's private joy, the baby's first word was Dada. On a quiet afternoon, Mike sat on the living room floor, trying to build a tower with Jeffrey using colorful blocks. The baby, who was now a solid toddler, had a different idea. His greatest pleasure came from demolition. "Watch them," Mike said, as he gently put one block on top of another. "Like this, a tower." Jeffrey observed with total concentration, his little forehead creased. The instant the third block was set, he lunged with a happy yell and knocked the tower down. "He has good instincts," Mary said from the doorway, her voice full of laughter. "He knows that destruction is quicker than creation." "He is a natural," Mike agreed, collecting the blocks to start again. "Maybe a little too natural." Mary came and sat with them, and Jeffrey immediately crawled onto her lap, forgetting the blocks. Mike just watched them, the woman and the boy, a perfect scene of simple joy, and he felt a rush of feeling that was still strong enough to surprise him. One evening, sitting on their small porch watching fireflies light up the twilight, Mike took a long breath. A feeling of deep calm had come over him, a quiet in his soul he had never known. "I never imagined this was possible," he said in a low voice, his arm around Mary. "This quiet, this feeling. I lived my entire life thinking peace was for other people, for the weak. I was mistaken." Mary looked up at him, her head resting on his chest. "You always had that inside you, Mike. It just took some time for you to see it. It took you deciding to look." He smiled, and the tension he had carried his whole life finally began to fade away. "I do not know what I would do without you," he admitted. "You will never have to find out," she answered, giving his hand a squeeze. "We are in this together. Always." The past, however, could not be erased so easily. It sent a final messenger. A sharp, sudden knock on the door one quiet afternoon shattered their peaceful life. It was a knock Mike knew, forceful and deliberate, with a cold authority. His body became tense as old habits took over. He saw Mary's face become pale. He stood up slowly and went to the door. He peered through the peephole. A man in a dark coat stood on the porch. His face was familiar. It was Frank, a man who had been one of his most loyal workers for almost a decade. Mike swung the door open, using his body to shield the view of the house. "Frank," he stated, his voice even, "you should not have come here." Frank did not move, his cold, businesslike eyes meeting Mike's. "Dominic sent me. He wanted you to get this." He offered a thick envelope. "And he has a message." Mike made no move to take the envelope. "What is the message?" "The old man is dead. Passed in his sleep last week. His heart failed." Frank's tone was completely flat. "Dominic wanted you to be aware. He also wanted you to know that your deal is being respected. You and your family are off the records for good. This envelope has the last of the papers. Legal title to some properties the old man kept in your name. Dominic figured you should have them. A clean split." Mike processed the information about his father's death. He thought he would feel something, maybe sorrow, or at least a sense of loss. But all he experienced was a quiet, remote sense of an ending, like shutting a book he had finished a long time ago. The man who had ruled his life, who had used and hurt him, was gone, and Mike only felt peace. He accepted the envelope. "Tell Dominic I said thank you, and that the terms are honored on my end too. As long as my family is not touched, he has no reason to worry about me." Frank gave a nod. He glanced past Mike for just a second, observing the simple house and the toys left on the porch. A small hint of something, maybe curiosity, crossed his face. Then he turned and left. Mike shut the door and bolted it. He turned around to see Mary standing in the center of the room, her arms crossed over her chest. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice shaking just a little. He went to her and wrapped her in his arms. "A ghost," he told her, saying a final goodbye. He did not mention his father's passing. That was a hurt he would deal with on his own time, and in his own way. For the moment, he just held her. As days bled into weeks, and weeks into months, the shadows of his former life faded until they were just memories. Mike and Mary built their new world together, one piece at a time, one day at a time. It was a life made of small happinesses. It was visits to the park and teaching Jeffrey how to throw a ball. It was the aroma of Mary's baking that filled their kitchen on Sunday mornings. It was quiet talks on the porch while the sun disappeared. It was completely normal, and it was his entire world. One afternoon, Mary was helping Jeffrey take his first unsteady, independent steps in the living room. Mike sat on the sofa, his heart pounding in his chest, as he watched his son walk toward him with a look of intense focus. "Come on, little man," he urged, holding his arms out. "You can do it. Come to Dada." Jeffrey managed one step, and then a second. His small legs were shaky but resolute. He swayed, nearly toppled over, but then corrected himself with a look of shocked success. He took 3 more steps before falling into Mike's arms, giggling with pure joy. Mike hugged his son tightly, taking in the smell of baby shampoo and innocence. He looked up at Mary, who was watching them both, with happy tears rolling down her cheeks. In that instant, he understood something with perfect clarity. Redemption was not about conquering the world, it was about conquering yourself. It was discovered when you chose love instead of power, and vulnerability instead of control. It was in the small, peaceful moments of a life lived with honesty. He was not Mike Nelson, the mob boss, anymore. That person was dead, buried alongside his father and the cold empire they had created. He was Mike, the father, the partner, the man who left everything behind to find something genuine. He looked at Mary, at the light shining in her eyes, and felt a wave of peace so profound and so absolute. It was like arriving home after a very long trip. He was free, and he was finally right where he was supposed to be. 5 years had gone by since Mike Nelson abandoned his former life. 5 years of quiet dawns and calm nights. 5 years of scraped knees and birthday celebrations, of disagreements about bedtimes and debates over eating vegetables. 5 years of a life he never thought was achievable for someone like him. The house they lived in now was bigger than the first humble home they rented. But it was not extravagant. It was a cozy family house on a street lined with trees in a peaceful part of town. The type of place where people waved at each other and kids played outside until the streetlights switched on. Mike had bought it outright using the profits from his logistics company, which was now booming. The money was clean, earned through hard, honest work. He felt a quiet, deep sense of pride in that fact every single day. On this specific Saturday morning, the house hummed with the energy of managed chaos. Jeffrey, now an energetic 6-year-old with his father's dark eyes and his mother's kind soul, was racing through the living room with a model airplane making loud buzzing sounds. His younger sister, Elena, named as a quiet tribute to the woman who sacrificed her life for his son, followed him on wobbly legs. She was 2 years old, with a head of soft brown curls and a laugh that could warm the most frozen heart. Mike frequently considered that if his old crew could see him now, running after a laughing toddler with a juice cup in his hand, they would not know who he was. He barely knew himself some days, and he was deeply thankful for that. Mary moved through the kitchen, getting ready for the small party they were having later that day. Her daughter, Lily, was flying in from the East Coast, where she was an assistant curator in a little art museum. It was the first time in months the whole family would be together, and Mary had been thinking about the food for weeks. Mike leaned against the kitchen doorway, just watching her. She moved with a simple grace, humming a quiet tune. She noticed him staring and lifted an eyebrow. "Are you planning to help, or are you just going to stand there and appreciate my hard work?" she asked, a playful smile touching her lips. "I was leaning toward appreciation," he replied, walking over to put his arms around her waist from behind. "But helping is also an option. What can I do?" She relaxed into his hug for a second, letting out a small, happy sigh. "Your job is to prevent the children from wrecking the entire house before Lily arrives. And maybe you could set the table." "I can handle that," he said, and kissed her on the temple before letting her go. He discovered Jeffrey and Elena out in the backyard. Jeffrey was trying to teach his little sister about the complex principles of flight, but she was far more fascinated by trying to eat a dandelion. "Elena, that is not for eating," Mike said, carefully taking the yellow flower from her tiny, stubborn hand. She gazed up at him with enormous, trusting eyes, and he felt a surge of love so powerful it still caught him by surprise after all this time. He lifted her into his arms, and she immediately reached for his nose and started to giggle. "Dad, when does Lily get here?" Jeffrey asked, forgetting his airplane and running toward them. "She said she would bring me a dinosaur book. She will be here very soon," Mike promised, using his free hand to mess up his son's hair. "How about you come help me with the table? I will put you in charge of the napkins." Jeffrey thought about this with the gravity of a man planning a battle. "Can I make them into cool shapes? Lily taught me how to fold a swan." "You can certainly try," Mike answered, a smile forming on his face. The afternoon passed with the comfortable rhythm of a family get-together. Lily showed up with presents for her siblings and a bottle of wine for the grown-ups. She had become a confident, smart young woman who carried her mother's inner fortitude and grace. Mike had been so anxious when he first met her all those years ago, feeling like a stranger breaking into their private world. But Lily had accepted him with a polite caution that eventually grew into true warmth. She always called him Mike, never Dad, and he was fine with that. Their relationship was something real, and that was more than enough. They all ate at the big table in the dining room, and the talk flowed without effort. Lily described her job and a new art show she was helping put together. Mary told stories about the cafe, which she still managed with a few dedicated employees. For a little while, Jeffrey took over the conversation, explaining every single thing he had learned about velociraptors. Elena made her contribution by flinging peas and laughing hysterically at herself. Later, after they finished eating, the sun started its descent, painting long golden stripes across the lawn. Mike found himself by himself on the back porch. He cupped a mug of coffee, letting the warmth soak into his hands. He could hear the sounds of his family inside, their laughter and the noise of plates being cleared away. It was the music of a normal life, and for him, it was the most perfect symphony he had ever heard. Mary stepped outside to be with him and slid her hand into his. They stood there in easy quiet, watching the final bit of daylight disappear from the view. "What is on your mind?" she asked him gently. He thought about her question. He thought of the person he once was, a cold, emotionless tool carrying out his father's orders. He thought of the long and difficult road that led him from that life to this one. He thought of the choices he made, the connections he destroyed, and the new family he had built. "I was just thinking about how fortunate I am," he said at last. "I do not feel like I earned any of this, but I am thankful for it every moment of every day." Mary gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "You chose this life, Mike. You went to war for it. That is not being fortunate. That is having courage." He shifted to face her, this woman who had seen past his defenses on a crowded airplane and had never given up on the man she saw inside. He bent down and kissed her. It was a soft, slow kiss that communicated all the love and thankfulness he often struggled to say out loud. From the house, Jeffrey's voice suddenly called out, "Dad! Elena has spaghetti in her hair again." Mike drew back from the kiss with a tired smile. "It seems I am needed." Mary laughed, and the sound was crisp and joyful in the cooling air. "Go on, I will be there in a minute." He turned and walked back into the warm glow of his house, moving toward his children's voices, toward the life he had chosen. He was Mike, a father, a husband, a man who had discovered his own salvation, not through dominance or fear, but through love. And as he lifted his daughter, who was covered in sauce, from her high chair while her laughter echoed in the room, he knew without a doubt that he was finally, completely, and undeniably home. If this story moved you, then prepare yourself for what is next. It is even more incredible and life-changing than you can believe. So please, stay right here. Tap the video that is appearing on your screen this instant to experience another unbelievable story that will change the way you see everything. I promise you, it is worth your time.